back. WNST, Towson, Baltimore, and Baltimore Positive. The hat, the Chiron. I got the other hat back here. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Royal Farms. Real fresh, real fast. It's Chicken Palooza month here, as well as our friends at Sporticulture. I got the hat on right now. We're going to have the black magma flowing in the magma lamp, hopefully in time for sports season. I'm sort of unabashed. I'm sort of too old to be diving behind the lockers like Lou Baker, to be hiding from my favorite columnists and my favorite writers. And sort of as I get older and the wisdom starts to flow in my direction, I appreciate some of my elders and my senior statesmen and guys that I bought drinks for at the Atlanta Super Bowl in 1999 amidst good times. This guy and I have been traveling the world together for a better part of 30 years and watched the Caps win a Stanley Cup together a couple of years ago. I conscientiously objected from all things Nationals World Series. I don't really hold Washington against this guy, even though he's written a lot about Washington. He lives in Frederick, so he is a Marylander. And he wrote just a fantastic column last week that I'm going to sort of outline a little bit, and it's going to be the conversation here. Thom Loverro, long time. Not first time, but, you're on the Fan in D.C., and sometimes you're at Georgetown, and you're always in the Washington Times, and always in my heart from all of our trips together and Oriole games many, many moons ago. But, man, you really hit it out of the park last week with your column, and I shared it, and I just said, I'm going to get Loverro on here and give Tommy Love the love that he deserves. How about that?
Well, thank you, Nestor. Thank you very much. I mean, we're all operating sort of in the dark here these days, but I think hiding from the truth doesn't help anybody.
Well, and I think the day this started, right? I mean, I remember I was out at, of all things, a sporting event, right, with a bunch of sports people giving a sports speech with Quint Kessenich, and he's a lacrosse guy, and we're sitting at the table, and they, sort of shut down the Ivy League lacrosse. And then an hour later, the Rudy Gobert thing happened as I was in the car on the way home. And I thought to myself, Jim Reese and his dad might be the last two people that I shake hands with here, maybe the rest of my life. I came home and realized what was going on, because in Wuhan and around the world, when people were getting diagnosed with this, the Willy Wonka white outfits were showing up and people were getting meat wagoned out. And that's how they were treating every single case in Asia as though it were its own little nuclear thing. Every case was that way because they realized how detrimental, like something out of a horrible movie, that this could become. And here we are 7 months later, and we're trying to start up sports as the pandemic is raging at a point that we could have only dreamed of in a nightmare scenario back in March when they shut down hockey and basketball, right?
I mean, I just read an article based on documents obtained by Yahoo that the death rate went up 27% last week. I mean, we anticipated control of this thing by the summertime, and instead, it's control. There's no control at this point, and if anything, we're still, like you said, raging out of control and facing a season where we're supposed to have a second surge at some point.
Well, you wrote a piece last week at the Washington Times, and yeah, I can refer to it in. Dude, what's the old Engelbert Humperdinck song? Every moment's a day, every day feels a lifetime. This was a week ago, right? And it feels like this was when it was just the Marlins. It wasn't the Cardinals. This is before Doug Peterson on Sunday night. And Lord knows by the time somebody hears this by the weekend, right, it'll be somebody else somewhere else doing something else, right? But you wrote this about the MLB's half-baked restart built on broken promises, which is really the broken promises we've got you covered in our workspace, like in the pork factory out in Iowa, and we're going to keep you safe. And that's a really tough message when Doug Peterson's delivering that in front of the team and saying you need to be all in, you need to not have sex, not visit your girlfriends, not go out for food, not commiserate with your buddies, not hug your children, not hug your mother and father who came in on a plane from Florida or Texas to see you, that it needs to be a full-on military shutdown. And the notion that, like, these guys are – come on, Tommy, we stayed in hotels with these guys for 25 years. These guys are not going to follow the rules. Like, they're just not. And I don't think that they really understand the consequences.
Yeah, I agree with you. I mean, anyone who has spent any time in a locker room or on a field with athletes couldn't possibly think that they'd be able to control them under these conditions. They're just not going to do it. I mean, it's just not going to happen. A lot of these guys are still children in their minds in the way they operate. So, for the television money, to try to still, latch onto that, they came up with this protocol plan that I know deep down they must have had doubts that they'd be able to pull off. And now here we are, barely 2 weeks into the season, and we've had, about 35, 40 cancellations so far of games. This is when it hit me, Nestor. Early in the season, early in March, when they started talking about playing the NCAA tournament without fans. And this was after the Ivy League had shut down their conference tournament. And I came to the conclusion that even though smart is not popular these days, the people in the Ivy League are smarter than most of us. I mean, the guys at Harvard are some of the smartest, probably, health officials in the country. And if they felt the need to shut down their basketball tournament, then that gives you an idea of what's coming. So I went on the radio and said, after they said there would be no fans, I said, no fans? There's not going to be a tournament. You're not going to be able to do this. And 48 hours later, they shut down the tournament. And, ever since then, it's been a fight to come to grips with the reality of what we're facing. We have a segment of the population of people that recognize the dire consequences of what we're fighting here, and another segment that, just refuses to believe that we're caught in the middle of a serious health crisis.
Well, I keep calling it a plague because that's sort of the biblical reference, right? Like, that would be like, a plague. I never heard of them. This is a plague. It's pandemic's a nice way of coding it, COVID, virus, call it whatever you want. These are the darkest circumstances, like literally something out of a movie. And yet sports is sort of firing up, and in so many different ways. And Tommy, as a sports guy, I almost ran for mayor here this summer before the pandemic, and Sheila Dixon, and you could go read about that on the internet, but that was where my pathway was going prior to this, and Baltimore Positive, and thinking how do you fix a broken city? And, we're in the last year of Camden Yards' lease now, right? Like, the lease expires next October 1st, literally, right? And there's no season, there's no fans, there's no hotels, there's no taxes, there's no collections being made. There's no reason to stage these games, really, for a team that can't win. And the weirdest thing for me is now that it's sort of started up, and I went 6 months I didn't talk sports for 6 months. Like, literally, March, April, May, June, all we did was talk about business, holding it together, how to order a pizza, how to do things safely, what's going on with this election, how do you mail in a voter, how do we vote for mayor in our own city when we move that back 5 weeks. So everything's sort of crazy. Now we're back to sports, right? So Luke's at the ballpark. He's one of 10 people out there. He's up on the roof somewhere wearing a mask and checking in. We got the Ravens checking in and owing those. And Tommy, I've been doing this my whole life, man. You've known me since I was a kid, man. I'm 52 years old. I can't, take this seriously, right? Like, my wife was watching hockey on Sunday, and I put it on, and it looks like they're playing ice hockey in a trash bag. You know what I mean? Like, all the seats have plastic around them in Toronto, where I remember being there for a Rolling Stones concert. I remember being there for Caps Maple Leafs games a couple of years ago when the place went bonkers. And I'm thinking, like, if you're not staging it for fans and you're not staging it for a championship that's legitimate and you're not staging it for statistics or the annals of history or to hang a flag or to gather people or to have a parade or to, sort of engender civic pride and all of these things that you down in D.C. wrote about last year with, a parade for the baseball team, 2 years before that, a parade for the hockey team, and all that lost around the Washington football team, which we haven't even gotten to, which was certainly the biggest story heretofore. It's probably why I reached to you 2 weeks ago, but I said these things happen. That was a year ago, Daniel Snyder. But these games that they're staging, and we're watching them right now, this is difficult to watch, right? Like, this is difficult to stay with the soap opera of any of these storylines that, like, they're going to hand a Stanley Cup to somebody in a couple of weeks, right?
It is for me. I mean, I'm not going anywhere near a press box, an arena, or a ballpark, as a columnist. And I don't really see the value of reporters going there where they have no contact with no actual contact with players, no actual contact with team officials. They can't be on the field in a baseball game kind of situation before the game. I mean, everything they get is via video. So I don't understand the value of it. I can sympathize with what is truly a money grab in trying to get the television revenue out of this, because money right now is a difficult commodity for a lot of people. And I'm not crying the blues for rich team owners and networks, but I understand the concept of the money grab. I just think that, hockey, they may get by in hockey since they left the country to play it. That may help them in the long run. And the bubble concept, may prove to be the only way you could do this. But hockey and the NBA, they finish their seasons for the most part. All they have to do is play a postseason. Baseball has to play a pretend season at least before they even get to the postseason. So there were so many reasons why you couldn't pull off a bubble concept with baseball or football for that matter, which leaves traveling from city to city. And I just think it's impossible to be able to contain this virus when you're traveling around like that so much and coming into contact with so many people. And football, I mean, all the experts that I've heard from say there's a second surge coming, and it's coming in the fall. So you have to anticipate that things are going to be worse in the middle of the so-called NFL season. I just don't understand who actually believes they can pull this off.
Well, there's a bit of arrogance built into this, right? And then there's the part that I've gotten to this week, and I'm going to continue to discuss, which is no matter what is where I am. 17 out of 30 Marlins, that sounded like, oh my God, last week, and that's where, I found you and retweeted you a week ago. They got through that. That just feels like the first wave. There's a second wave. There's a third wave. I don't know what would stop this. If Doug Peterson's in the hospital this weekend, if Lamar Jackson's mother is in the hospital, I don't, literally, someone's wife, someone's pregnant wife at home, what makes them stop doing this? My guess is now this: nothing. I think we're at the no matter what stage, because from baseball, and Tommy, you're old school, brother, there's nothing legitimate about this season. Nothing. Not the players, not a season where there's no Nick Markakis and there's no, name your player. The player that opts out, Cespedes over the weekend. Pick the next group that there's literally no integrity, no legitimacy to any of this, really, on the baseball side of things specifically. And then the football side, the notion that they're going to do this for 4.5 months and play a Super Bowl in Tampa in early February, like that's really going to happen? I really have a hard time buying the first chapter of a book that has no conclusion, and I can see that it hasn't been written, and it probably won't be written.
Here's how I think this will fall apart. This is where the no matter what situation won't matter. It won't matter if they don't have players to play. I think the players themselves will call an end to this by starting to opt out in greater numbers and go home in greater numbers. I guarantee you there are a lot of conversations that have taken place and will take place in kitchens and living rooms and bedrooms of these homes of these athletes with their families when their wives look at them and say, the risk is too great. The risk is too great for us, for our children, for you. It's just too great. I just think as you see more and more positive tests, you're going to see more players opt out until there's a point where the guys who run the sport say, we can't keep going on because we're going to run out of players. So I think the athletes themselves, the fear factor is real.
Well, the fact that the Patriots are now playing JV,
no matter what
right?
the numbers are, the fear factor is real.
Thom Loverro has been my friend a long, long time. I don't know, 3 decades, probably more than that. Were you at Camden Yards the day it opened in '92?
Yes, I was.
Okay, so I
was there at '92. Sutcliffe's masterpiece.
Yeah, we're going back 28 at least. So I know we were there together that day. I'm trying to think about when I met you or where I met you. Maybe in the Capitol Center press box at a Bullets game or a Caps game in the Langway. Or I don't even know. But you've been doing this a long, long time. The thing that stood out about your piece last week at the Washington Times, you said, for the most part, the effort to start up sports in this atmosphere is arrogant and ignorant. And I thought, that's some strong words coming from Tommy Love, and I thought, yeah, I'll sign on for that. That's going to get a retweet from me. That's going to get a comment from me. So the thing is, why do this, right? And the media money is there, and what's the end result in doing all of this? But baked into all of this is sort of a new way to do things, and them. Look, every coach we've ever met was going to fix every problem child, right? Like they all think that it's part of being an athlete or a coach at that level is you really do think you're impervious to everything, right? There is a part of that Superman complex that makes them who they are, including Dan Snyder, and makes him who he owns the team, right?
Yes, there is that. There is that mentality. It's how they can live with their failures. I mean, they figure they'll overcome what's in front of them, but that usually does not include their family. This is the real X factor, is they're making decisions that will directly affect the health of their family. And I think that those conversations that I talked about are something that really these athletes haven't dealt with before in their sport, because for the most part, what the NFL players dealt with was what happened in their locker rooms, in their weight rooms, in their training rooms, things like that. Now it's all connected to what happens at home and what happens in the building where they work. And I think that's just going to come into play. There's nothing more personal than your health.
I had a meaty conversation last week with Peter King that I hope everybody checks out up in the buyatoyota.com audio vault. But it was about media. And I remember like the day that all the .coms began with the league and their teams, Peter King wrote something at his Monday Morning Quarterback 15 years ago about the access and how things were going to change and information was going to change. And, Adam Schefter breaking news. And you were in the news business. I was in the news business. If you had a scoop on a Redskin coach getting fired or player getting hired or changing the guard in Abe Poland's franchise, and you had it first because Wes told you or Abe told you, whatever, whoever was on the beat, Jim Lynam, you got a scoop, you felt something about it. All that sort of going away, and when they hear you say, Tom, I'm not going anywhere near a press box, or a guy like me who was banned literally 14 years ago from asking questions of the Baltimore Orioles after having a press pass for 21 years, Tom, that I'm now in my 15th year of being banned, I have very little doubt that I may have touched and stood in a room with a coach or a player for the last time in my career. Like, by the time this thing clears 3 years from now, they're not really going to want to let anybody back in again.
Yeah, they're not crazy about access in the first place. It's a necessary evil that they felt that they dealt with in order to help promote the product. But if they learn that they can live without it, absolutely.
Well, look at soccer in Europe, right? I mean, those guys don't ever go anywhere near a reporter.
Yeah.
They get closer to cheerleaders than they do to reporters.
Yeah, I mean, look, we've all had great relationships along the way with athletes that we've covered in the locker room. But if push comes to shove, they'd rather not see us there. They just rather not have us there. I'll never forget, this is my favorite Eddie Murray story. From his second time with the team. He played in 96. He got traded from the Indians in 96. And I had a pretty good relationship with him then. Not that it did me any good in terms of getting anything. But Eddie liked boxing, and he knew I covered boxing. So we got along really well. So when he came back in 97 with the Angels he had signed with, and they were visiting Camden Yards, I went over to see him in a visitor's locker room. And he was talking to me, and a couple of his teammates walked by and were shocked that Eddie was talking to me. And he looked at them and he said, "It's okay. He's the non-poisonous kind." In other words, they're all snakes, and Eddie liked me.
Right.
So we're a necessary evil that if they can learn to live without, they will definitely live without.
Speaking of the poisonous kind, how about that football owner down there, right? Like, I've had a litany of really cool guests in the last month. I had Rick Vaughn on a couple of weeks ago, tracked him down to talk about Joe Madden and talk about the last game at Memorial Stadium. I had Kevin Byrne now, right, leaving Baltimore, and sort of the confluence of Byrne and Vaughn and the aforementioned Paul Sorrento, Rick Sutcliffe, game in April of 92 and the opening of Camden Yards and the Baltimore Bombers that never happened, and the football game with the Dolphins and the Saints, and the fact that Jacksonville and Charlotte happened, and then Angelos was trying to get the Buccaneers here, right? And also the Raiders and also the Rams at one point. And boom, Art Modell shows up. And here we are 25 years later, you and me, all these Super Bowls, Bullets become Wizards, Masson becomes Masson, Angelos becomes wealthy, the Nationals become born. It's incredible of all of this. The Orioles' fall is its own story, but what Dan Snyder has amounted to and what this has become for that proud franchise there, the one that owned the nation's capital. Ugh, right? I mean, and you've witnessed all of this. And when you talk about poor treatment of media, poor treatment of fans, not having an ear to anything, Dan Snyder is, who's going to write that book, Tom? That's a hell of a book inside the brain of Dan Snyder.
I've asked that question myself. That's a hell of a book to be written, because basically what we've seen is the destruction of one of the NFL's marquee franchises, and the only thing that saves them and saves him is the safety net of the popularity of NFL football. I mean, in a way, the product itself is, no matter how you serve it, is immune from total destruction because it's NFL football and people love it. But the television ratings are less than half of what they were 10 years ago. Attendance at what I call Ghost Town Field is, sometimes there were games where there were 25,000 people in the stands and 15,000 of them were visiting fans. It's remarkable the destruction he has created. And he's the one, everyone's pretty excited about Ron Rivera, a new age with a new name and a new way of doing things. There's nothing going to change. Dan Snyder is common denominator for all the dysfunction of this organization, and he's not going anywhere. NFL owners do not like to get rid of their own because they fear of there, but the grace of God go I. So Dan Snyder's not going anywhere. He's not going to be forced out. And I'm very skeptical of much. I compared it to, here's their chance for success. I compared it to when Joe Torre got hired in New York to manage the Yankees in 96. He had success early. They won that World Series in 96. We know they stole it from the Orioles with Jeffrey Meyer's catch. We know that.
I was sitting there that day, too, by the way. You were there that day, right?
Yeah, we were in the Yankee Stadium in the press box for that one.
Were you down the line where I was? Garceau was sitting to the right of me and Alan McCallum to the left, and we literally were underneath the overhang in the foul territory. Like, we had the best view in the entire stadium of the arms going over because we were parallel to the foul pole.
Yeah, you were in the auxiliary box, so you had a better view than me.
You were behind home plate. Okay, all right.
Yeah, I was in the main press box. My point is, in Torre that year won the World Series, and then 2 years later won the World Series again, and had success early. And he's the guy who got credit for it. And he became the icon for that franchise, and he had the power of that behind him. So when he got into power struggles with Steinbrenner had to back off because Torre was literally the more powerful figure in the organization. But that's only because he got a leg up by being so successful so early and the fans falling in love with him. That's Ron Rivera's only chance, is to win and win early. So fans all of a sudden become, Ron Rivera, is God kind of movement, and he can do no wrong. And so if there's a confrontation behind the scenes, Rivera knows he has the upper hand. Otherwise, this will just unfold just like all the others have unfolded. I call it the aura of self-destruction. And that's what covers the Redskins.
Well, and it still feels very much that way. I was out a week or two ago, and I went into a store, and I saw, like a Redskins quilt and things that are branded with the Chief on it. And I'm thinking to myself, how long before it really does get phased out? And the relative value of signing on to the franchise at this point, it's kind of like, how can the Orioles possibly recruit any new fans in this environment to anyone that's never watched a baseball game before? You can't go to the games now. They sort of suck on TV, the flatness of it that you and I covered a few minutes ago. But then there's the NFL trying to rev up the engine, and if it's a bad idea for baseball, Tom, give me a readout on where this is for football in starting this engine now and thinking that there's going to be an end to this in the beginning of February, and at what point this becomes a mistake for them.
Well, that's what I can't figure out at this point. I can't figure out what does more damage, not starting at all or starting and having to abandon it in the middle of a season. I think having to abandon it in the middle of the season gives a look of incompetence, even though I don't think it's possible to basically, do these sports and contain the virus among them. I just think it'll be a worse look when they turn around and have to end the sport in the middle of October, if they're lucky, because of the virus can't be controlled. Long-term damage, the NFL seems, just bulletproof. They just seem, they're like nothing can harm them because it's such a great TV show, and live sports is so important to television these days because nobody watches the commercials on anything else but live sports when they have to. So I think the NFL will survive. Baseball is going to take a hit. Baseball is going to take a hit.
Well, it's amazing that you just think, look, all we have to do is keep 2,000 people safe, right? It sounds easy to do. It's not, right? That during a plague, it's not that easy, just like all the epidemiologists told us back in March, that it just would not be that easy. It wouldn't care if you're famous. It wouldn't care if you're black or white or red or blue or left or east or west. It just wouldn't matter, and I think we've learned that it hasn't mattered. It didn't matter to Freddie Freeman and certainly for Eduardo Rodriguez and whatever his health concerns are going to be moving forward, and for all the Michael Pierce's and these players that have opted out already. To your point, the players will have to be the ones that say no, and they're the ones that seem to never can say no, right? Like, they need the money.
Yes, but like I said, the real X factor in this are family discussions, family debates. I mean, players with young children at home, players, with who family members have underlying conditions that make them more susceptible to damage if the virus comes into their homes. I think this is not like anything we've ever dealt with on any level, at least in our lifetime. And I just think ultimately that the fear factor is going to look. Dave Martinez, the Nationals manager, came out last week and said he's scared. He's still. Oh, how can you do your job when you're frightened of your health? I mean, everybody's facing that, and I just think that ultimately it's going to wear on people till they say, "I'm going home and be with my family."
Tommy, I always appreciate seeing you. I'm sorry we're not bumping into each other and eating hot dogs together and laughing about sports and being jovial from time to time. And I wish we had better news to report here. But certainly we're all home and the games are on, at least for now. And we're discussing them as sort of reasonably as we can, right? Caps are going to win the cup, right?
They might. Ovechkin doesn't look like he's missed a step, virus or no virus.
Well, here we go. Let's fire up the televisions at night for something other than the Cooking Network for me and my wife and the dogs and the cats and the Animal Network. So she's got baseball on, at least for now, and, it's 100 degrees, which means the hockey game's on. Tommy, appreciate you, man. We'll continue to follow you out there for all you're doing and your podcast, and, of course, that at Washington Times. We'll send everybody out to Twitter and follow you as well.
Nestor, thanks for having me. Always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thom Loverro, he is of the Washington Times and can be found and followed out on Twitter, and I find him on Facebook. And he wrote a great piece last week, MLB's Half-Baked Restart Built on Broken Promises. And it's always good to have him on. I wish I had him on for, cigars and curveballs, probably bourbon and cheeseburgers and probably some shrimp cocktail from time to time as well. Always good to visit with Tom. All of our WNST coverage brought to you by our friends at Pizza John's. They're down there back River Neck Road in Essex. I've been going there my whole life. I'll be like 72, 73. My uncle had a salon off Marlin Avenue, but it's when I discovered Pizza John's. Been going there my whole life. They're closed on Mondays. I was the idiot who went there 4th of July week when they were closed looking for pizza a couple weeks ago. I shouldn't brag about being that dumb. Nasty at WNST.net. Wouldn't stop you from listening. Wouldn't start you from listening. Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, Snapchat, Instagram, anywhere the internet is served, we are safe, calm, watching sports, hoping for the best, and trying to stay Baltimore positive.